Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Tuesday. We're here. We're happy to live stream. We're going to be doing some coding today. I'm Shai. I'm part of the developer relations team. Joining me is my colleague David. David, how are you doing?
Hey, not bad.
And then I'm really excited to have Alan coming back for his second appearance. Alan, how's your morning going?
Going great, guys. Good to be here.
Alan, I didn't realize how early it was the last time we had you on, and I feel like I need to apologize for just consistently forcing you to wake up at an unreasonable hour. So,
well, I'm seeing more sunrises this way, so it's not a total loss at all. We just had a gorgeous one here in Oregon.
Nice, a true optimist.
We'll have to have you next time. Have you take the stream outside with the sunrise in the background or something.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I need to put some more Oregon photos in my feed here. Yeah.
Cool. So we've got some fun stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Alan has a really cool styled asset app that he's been prototyping, and since we're doing app work, we're going to bring David into this because David is the master of apps in the Contentful DevRel team. As well, which should be a lot of fun. Just before we get started, I got a couple housekeeping notes that I want to go through, which we can do really quickly. First off, on the next slide, you'll see that we've got a meetup. We're doing our community hangout again on the 16th, which is next week. We're really excited about it. We have some really great speakers lined up that I'm really looking forward to. There's going to be 2 of these meetups. There's going to be one for the European time zone, one for the North American time zone. And you can learn more about that on the Contentful website. On the next slide, we'll have all our links. So the first one, as always, is our code of conduct. We do want these streams to be safe and inclusive and fun. And to do that, it's really important that we have a code of conduct that we're all abiding by. So if any of us on stream or anyone in the chat is doing anything to make you feel unwelcome or to feel in any way not like you're having a good experience, please do reach out. All the information for contacting folks is on at that link. It's also in our documentation. If you just want to go to the Contentful website and search for code of conduct, there's links to all of our reporting parties there that you can find if something does happen and you do want to reach out about that. Please do let us know. We want to make sure that everyone watching is and participating is comfortable. Next up, we've got the Contentful developer portal. That's contentful.com/developers. That's our go-to place for all things developer resources. So we've got links to our documentation. We've got links to our tutorials. We've got links to everything that you need to get started as a Contentful developer, to level up as a Contentful developer, to discover what Contentful is. That's the place to go, contentful.com/developers. We've also got our community Slack. If you have questions, if you're looking for help, if you need something outside of the hours of us live streaming, our whole DevRel team is on there, and we're really excited to be a support to you and your teams if there's anything that you need. If you're looking to learn GraphQL, we're really proud of this GraphQL course that we put out. That's online. You can check that out. It's a great way to learn either GraphQL, React, and the Contentful API, or all 3 of them at the same time. And if you build something using GraphQL, we want to hook you up with some swag. We still have some limited edition GraphQL swag, and we'd be delighted to hook you up. All you have to do is let us know what you've made, and we'll send something out. And the last thing, as always, is we do see you in the comments. I see we've got Salma over in the Twitch. We've got Stefan over in the YouTube. We're keeping an eye on all the comments, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Twitch, or Periscope. Please do let us know what questions you have and if there's anything that we should be doing or helping us out when we make silly typos and spell things wrong. Please do let us know. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. That's what makes the stream so much fun, is when we get to do the interaction. But that's it for me. I'm going to shut up for a little bit. I've been talking for too long. And Alan, I hear that you've been working on some things. What do you got? What do you got for me today?
Yeah, well, we had the opportunity at Contentful recently. So I'm a solutions engineer, and for the audience, my name's Alan White. Appreciate the intro. I'm a designer and developer with about 25 years experience, and was a Contentful customer for about 3 years. Building sites and product design, products of all kinds. Worked with a bunch of different CMSs. Contentful has always been one of my favorites. So when I had the chance to join, I jumped at it, and I'm embarking on a new career of solutions engineering, which some people call sales engineers. So we basically get to talk to customers, come in looking for help with a variety of technical problems, and my job is to help answer those questions, figure out how to solve their problems, bringing that experience to bear. So I'm kind of been having a ball this year professionally. But one of the things that I really was delighted to do recently was our fast growing solutions engineering team had a hackathon, a hack day. I think it was right around Halloween, so we kind of had a autumn themed, Oktoberfest sort of flavored hack day, and we were grouped up into teams of 3 to 4 people each, all over the world. So we're well distributed between Europe and the U.S. and people from all kinds of backgrounds, different technical backgrounds, specialties, etc. So it was but honestly, this is one of the most brilliant teams I've ever worked with. So we had a lot of fun. So the goal that was put before us was to build something with Contentful's extensibility framework. That's our app framework. And you can use that to extend Contentful, basically to bring other systems, other kinds of data into Contentful and into the editorial experience and do really cool things with it. So what I want to do is kind of show, there was a 3-person team with 2 other gentlemen by the name. We were the Gentlemen of Hack. That was our team name. Just kind of a made up name there. But Charlie and James were our 2 other stakeholders. One has a background in infrastructure, and the other has a background in front end engineering. So I kind of decided to, just really these are things that I learned doing user experience design and product design. They're really just, how do you brainstorm? How do you reach consensus? How do you then refine your ideas rapidly in order to get a result? And so we brought those to bear. And so the first half of the day, and we had a full day to work on this, we didn't even really know what was possible. But the first part of the day was us just, a couple hours brainstorming. The goal was about lunchtime. It's like, let's have our concept agreed upon and refined and ready to start coding. And then we spent the afternoon helping. James did most of the pretty much all the coding. So I focused on documentation, illustrating the concept, detailing it out. All those are the things that a product needs, right? It's not just the code, right? You have to be able to explain what it does, explain the use case. We did some customer research that I'll highlight here. So I'll just jump into that now if you like.
Let's do it.
All right, I'm going to share a different window.
Okay.
This thing is cool. Mike and StreamYard, it's very, very robust. Let's see, got a lot of windows. Let's share my Miro board. Miro, one of my favorite products, man. I really wish I'd had this when I was doing product design full time, because it's just kind of magic. And I'm a big fan of their work. So see this okay?
Yeah, would you be able to zoom in a little more just to make sure that our viewers can see it? Our viewers are fans of Miro too. We're seeing a shout out for Mira in the audience as well.
I think in our current situation too, with everyone working remotely, this is brilliant solution, right? This is the virtualization of all that collaboration, whiteboard stuff.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to visit the Berlin office after I was hired for my onboarding. Even though Corona was starting to bubble up around the world, I was like, I'm gonna take a calculated risk and go. And I got to walk through our product development areas where the walls were just covered with drawings and sticky notes. I mean, it was just nourishing to walk through and see all that. But now, like everyone else in the world, we've all had to pivot, very hard to all virtual. And honestly, we've all been really productive and we've been performing really well. So, smart people with good tools and a great mission, that can create some great stuff. So what you're seeing here is, I don't think there's anything we can't share here. I didn't really survey it too, but these are just ideas. And as somebody told me once,
oh no, you leaked an API key. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh no, right? Not a secret hack. No, somebody told me once that ideas are basically, they have no value. Like they're a weightless particle with no mass.
I feel like it's a pretty common trend in like the startup world.
Exactly. Like great ideas are a dime a dozen, but only execution really matters. So, these are ideas that could be some interesting things. So what I did was we first few minutes, we had each of the participants just throw stuff on the board. Here's my great idea. And I won't spend too much time on this, but the process was interesting because you can transform that once you do a quick pass, and you're seeing a couple hours after our initial brainstorm. So this transformed over the course of an hour or two into this, which was, we would see these and we started to notice some themes, and those themes were around dashboards, rich text nodes, or other workflow related apps, concepts, right? And these are all, our team is very closely connected to the customer. We hear, we meet hundreds of customers a year, and we get to hear all kinds of interesting problems and challenges that they have. But over time, I would basically take these and transform these into these kind of like, these kind of smart cards, and then you can tag them, right? And so we noticed some themes, and as the guys are working, I'm kind of going, we got 3 themes, and we've got some other tags, and that the tags enable us then to kind of spot patterns, because you can then, search for things like, let's say, integration.
Okay, so just to put this into context, we're talking about, you guys have been brainstorming about app ideas that you want to build in Contentful, and what you're doing is effectively showing your process, how you think about what is the most, out of all of these great ideas that you have, what is the most important one, and how do we even start to take that first step on the path of executing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of tried to categorize them loosely into these categories, and then we kind of talked through each one. Then the next step, after we kind of brainstormed with some of these ideas, and honestly, I told our team, I'm like, look, we can't just leave all these great ideas on the cutting room floor. We've got to go back and essentially take an agile methodology approach and go groom them, as you would say. It's basically, you got a big backlog of stuff you got to go through and then prioritize it and pull out the gems, because there were a ton of gems that we just didn't have time to implement. We didn't win the hack day. I think we made the podium, but the idea that won was a dashboard idea that was essentially, I don't want to give it away, but it was an integration with an analytics platform that was so good. All kinds of rich data with that about Contentful in this dashboard. Fantastic.
You're alluding to the New Relic.
The one that won. It was the deep ML integration. My bad. My bad.
But you were just talking about New Relic one.
Yes, it was a New Relic dashboard. That wasn't the one that won. The deep ML one won because of its utility. But honestly, the fact that our guys were able to ship stuff in a single day, it totally blew me away. I didn't expect that. So the next stage we did, and we didn't spend a lot of time here, but so you only saw some of the ideas. A lot of those ideas moved over. They graduated to this next step of just a simple, how much value do we think this thing has, and can we execute it in a day? So stuff that was on, stuff that tended to be on, wrong. I'm not trying to drag. There we go. It's not letting me do it. Stuff on this side of the graph was going to be, those are more achievable in a day. And then stuff in the upper right quadrant was going to be like, these were some that were good candidates. So I think we even see some of these rich text ones start to emerge. Little did we know rich text was going to be a little more of a challenge. But let's talk about our concept right there, unless you have questions on this stage.
No, let's keep going. I want to get into the. I know where this ends, so I'm.
Yeah, right. And I'm gonna, and for the audience, I'm gonna have to leave early at about 8:30 local time in order to make an important meeting, internal. But I do want to talk through and set up the stage for David and Shai to kind of take it further. So I just made this up. Hey, we're moving left to right, concept refinement zone. So once we kind of had some of these ideas, one thing we wanted to do was, we were like, do customers actually want this? So this, depending on what you're trying to make, and you out there in the audience, what your idea is, what you're being asked to do. Well, this is an important input for us as solutions engineers at Contentful. So our ideas might be cool and neat, but if nobody has asked for them or customers aren't like pushing for it, it's not going to get attention. It's probably not a thing you need to work on. So that was an important step. And one thing we looked for was things like, like this right here. How do I wrap an text around an image in the rich text field of Contentful? I tried HTML, but it didn't work. So rich text, super powerful, structured content. It has all kinds of utilities, and honestly, it's one of the gems that makes Contentful stand out in the marketplace as a construct for creating really amazing connected content across your customer experience. So this right here, as a developer and designer, I have run into. I'm like, I need to create. Let's see the next slide. Where is it? I want to create. I got to zoom out even more. Okay, this is what we used to do right here. Okay, some of you who've been working with Contentful for a while, or other CMSs where you get Markdown. That means you can stick a little HTML in there when you need something extra. So I'm a big fan of Tailwind. I like Tailwind. I build a lot of sites with it, and I'm like, hey, I need this image to float left or right, right, to kind of look like this, right? Okay, common scenario. Well, in rich text, you would have to, do a custom node. Or bring in a custom, like module, essentially. Not going to get into that too much, but
the type
basically,
and have some selections on the type, and you'd have to click into the thing and set up the renderer
right, short of injecting just HTML straight into your page.
But I mean, the Markdown way definitely has its downsides. Don't throw rich text completely under the bus.
Right. I mean, I'm not slipping backward. I mean, I look at it every now and then, and I'm like, man, Markdown was nice, but at the same time, it's also not truly structured.
That's because we're all programmers here.
Right, like it's not
close that div tab or that image
tab. Yeah, you saw that. A little attention to detail there. But it's not this. It's not the modular. That's what makes rich text so amazing. It's not just a WYSIWYG. It's structured content. You can bring in your other entries, components, right, and it's modular. And it outputs it as JSON so that you can then, as a developer, can transform that into whatever you need, right? So, but what I had done in the previous stage was validated that, okay, it's not just me. Like, there's other customers asking how to do this. How could we make this easier to do? So then we kind of had it down to two different concepts. And here I just drew this. Again, it's a very free form zone, and I know it looks chaotic, but when you're moving really fast, it's okay in that stage for it to be, you refine as you go throughout the process. So we looked at this one, and this was one concept that was like, we just need, that's another customer request. How do I make a jump link within? And that's something we'll probably need to build at some point. But we decided at the end, the styled assets one, it's simple enough. Who we talked about, like, who is it for? So this is another important product design step, is like, okay, wait, am I building this for myself and my own, selfish needs, or is there actually somebody who we understand as our customer or user is gonna get value out of this? And so we decided our content editor, and I like to just give them things to say. The devs like, how do I, achieve what I was describing a minute ago? And the content editor is like, how can I just add just a little custom formatting to my rich text fields? So
I think in the developer world, or in that kind of space, we would probably think of those as like user stories, right?
Absolutely. Or jobs to be done is another framework that's very common as well. So those are, these are very light and easy. It's a little more lean UX, which is you just pull the very little bit to move forward. Just so you have enough understanding to move rapidly. But we tried to define some of the business impact. There's some points there that I'm like, if I was being grilled by the head of product, these might be answers that I would have to be ready to give. So what we decided was, it's really, I think, it's like I've implemented this in other CMSs, so it's not like this was a brand new concept or anything, but I thought, really all we need is an image with a text field. That's all we need. It's just a place to put strings. And the cool thing, the reason I made this little silly thing up here was that it's harmless. Like if you don't then hook it up on the front end template, it's just a little bit of metadata that's just sitting there. It's not going to hurt anything. So first, do no harm. It's a good principle to take here. But really decided 2 fields. One is a place for strings, right? To put utility CSS strings, and they could be your own. I'm a fan of Tailwind, and here's one that's already documented. You can also do really cool stuff like mobile breakpoints, and you could drop that in. So what the cool thing about that, just real quick, is that for desktop, you could say, yeah, this needs to float right. But if it's mobile, you could say clear those floats and just be in the middle, right? So you can add all kinds of amazing capability just with a little extra CSS and some documentation, without hurting anything and without adding a bunch of other content types or content structures.
So Alan, sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, so on the left there, what you were zooming in on, where you showed the text box and the CSS field, so that image on the left that you've got is the rich text editor inside of Contentful. That's text and an image asset, and what you're doing is you're adding this custom component directly underneath the image called CSS Classes. That's like this text input place. And what you're saying is when a developer reads the API of Contentful, so once this content is published and the developer is building, say, a website or something, this is something they can use in conjunction with, like, let's say, Tailwind, a CSS framework or library, that will allow them to understand how to style the asset as opposed to just putting it wherever, right?
Right. And this, like, for example, this is an example right here of what you would put in that field, and it would create this CSS here when generated, or it would be referencing CSS. It's essentially achieving this. Now, those CSS classes would need to be whitelisted and included in the front end application, whatever that is. So that's an important step. But if you're a developer and you're working with something like Tailwind, all that, right? So this is really just a way to kind of dovetail with what developers are already doing. But to give the key here that we're trying to empower is we're trying to empower this content editor who just needs a little more control without adding a big lift to the developer. Okay,
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So to wrap up our day, though, and then I'll pivot back to you guys. While James, our programmer on our team, on our hackathon team, we're like, great, you go for it. Take a stab. I think we got ourselves a little over our heads because most of the prep for the hack day was focused around shipping Contentful apps and not apps that deliver rich text nodes. So like we made it a little bit hard for ourselves. We thought we had a simple concept, but it turned out it was just a little more work because of the complexities of rich text, which we open sourced in April, something like that.
Yes,
okay.
With the editors.
There's a webinar as well if folks are looking for a really in-depth dive into rich text, and we'll toss that in the comments as well. Right.
That would be great. And me not being a programmer, I'm a dabbler, but not a programmer, probably underestimated the amount of technical lift that would require. But that's why I'm so glad that David is here. He has been looking at our first attempt to get this thing shipped. We feel like there is definitely enough interest and utility. I would love to, as a solutions engineer, I would love to put this into a customer demo and we have a really cool Next.js demo that we use that's just, it works so well. I really love using it and love showing it to customers. But I would love to get this implemented in the front end to show, like, when the customer asks me that question, how do I just make this image float left or right, or give it a little bit of styling? I can go, hey, we got a rich text node for you, and look, you can build your own. That's, to me, the real exciting part, is to kind of say, hey, our team mocked this up in a day, and then we had a guy, help us ship it, and then like that was that's not even a sprint's worth of effort, right? That you can then, and get exactly the kind of effort you need. So I think I can wrap up with a couple things we learned, right? We discovered a lot of promising concepts. Rich text nodes are harder than we thought. We really, honestly, and I think in this virtual world that this reality we're all living in, product design methodology, and it's not, it's all stuff you can do on whiteboards, it's stuff you can do on sticky notes, but it's the methodology, it's what to do. Miro gives you all these great templates, but you need some training to kind of know what to do with them. So teams that do that, even if you're not UX design, like it's just problem solving. Great stuff for that. We like Miro. And the Forma 36, I wanted to mention that. These are some of the assets that we have at Contentful to basically help you build your own. So it's not like you have to come up with all your own, CSS, React components on your own. Those are already there at Forma 36. So, and that is that we have a storybook there, but let's see. You can almost see the URL there. f36-storybook.contentful.com is where the React kind of like storybook is for containing those. So definitely check those out if you're interested in building any kind of Contentful app.
Yeah, for sure. And it looks like we've just got a few minutes left. And I think I just want to ask you one quick question, which is, when you were developing this, did you feel at all like the tools that were, at your disposal here, did it feel like that was part of the, was that making it easier or harder for you in this case?
The tools at our disposal, are you talking about the things that I covered, or the code tools in order to actually create something?
So I guess what I'm asking is, when you're attacking a problem, or you're trying to solve a problem inside of Contentful, do you find that the tools that are already available to you are helping you think about these problems in a better way? Or how are you using this kind of stuff?
Yeah. I think they are helping. I think they're helping. It's interesting, as you try to scale some of these processes, you need more, and this is a theme we hear with customers all the time, you need more governance. So really that means, honestly, it means experience in knowing how to assemble people, and how to constrain or define their roles. If it's too open-ended, and honestly, these tools are extremely open-ended. Contentful is that way. We have the same problem with Contentful of being not problem, but it can do so many things in so many use cases, right? That it's so flexible. Honestly, one of the big themes we've heard this year from customers is, okay, can you be more prescriptive? Tell us what to do, honestly. And they're smart. They have incredible technical teams, but they're like, how do we get the best out of this? And we're seeing that all over, because we're in this incredible time in human history with these incredible flexible tools, right? So that's where the experience and the, really just, experience and education on how to get the most out of these really comes into play.
I think that makes sense. And I think it's, looking at the process that you go through, I think that's, a process that a lot of people go through. If they don't, maybe it's something to try out, because I think what you've done is a very organized way of thinking about things and seeing how you've kind of filtered down to the end product, or close to the end product. You realize, you recognize that there's potentially other use cases there, right? I saw you had in quotes, it was like, it's just strings.
Right.
So we're talking about, this is just a data type that any developer can implement and use.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the rich text editor is doing. It's like this kind of data type within a data type that allows you to get very custom, which I'll, hopefully try to dive into in a little bit here.
But that's amazing.
Yeah. So I think just, before you go, because I know you mentioned that you've got to leave. I really want to say, I find this project very interesting, and I think it's going to be super useful, especially the way you're thinking about how Contentful is extremely customizable, in the sense that you've you dived into like this weird section that maybe not a lot of people look at,
Right.
and yet even there you find this ability to do a thing that you needed to do in a custom way. So I think that's really cool.
Man, thank you. And I just want to say, like, I think the reason we honed in on this spot is this is the middle of the onion, if you know, or this is the center of the nesting doll. This is like the area that content editors are going to hone into. It's one of the core parts of our demo that we show customers, because it is the exciting part. This is the fun stuff. It is how to create and structure your content to get business value, to do your job, right? But to do it in a really powerful way. And the more modular we can make that, you know, the stronger, you know, the happier our customers are, and the stronger our product is. So I love the extensibility, you know, approach here. I think it's got enormous potential, and we've really only started this journey, you know, with it being open source this year, and can't wait to see more. So David, thanks for the encouragement. And I hate that I have to go and see where I won't be able to see where this is going live, but I do want to follow up at some point with you, and I can't wait to see how it goes. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, we're gonna be coding for at least an hour. So maybe once your meeting wraps up, if you have time, you can jump in and maybe we can show you what we've made in the next hour. Yeah. So, and folks in the comments, I think, also agree that this is really exciting, and there's a lot of people that are looking forward to.
Ooh, that's great! I can't wait to hear about that one there. That quote. All right, have a good one, guys. I'll see you in a bit.
All right.
See you. Yes.
Yeah, all right, David. Should we build an app?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. That's the catchphrase. But actually, let's address that comment that you had up.
Yeah, let me pull it back up. We've got a bunch of comments. We've got a few people complimenting me on my jacket, which I very much appreciate. Thank you, everyone. But let's take a look at what Wal Polea is saying.
So I think this is a great step. I think I've implemented a custom content type field in every project I've done in order to give the content developer control over the component view. So yeah, this is a pretty common, I wouldn't say problem. This is just kind of a consequence of using Contentful, right? You're going to have a component view or a display layer or whatever you want to call it, a presentation layer. But what I find really interesting about this styled asset component is the fact that what we're talking about here is styling an asset in context, right? So it's not metadata that lives on the asset globally. It's not a content type. It's not an extra content type that you have to create to then apply metadata to and then reference back into a specific entry. What we're talking about here is actually applying metadata directly to an asset in context, and that's only where it lives. So I think this is like a really, I mean, when Alan first showed me this, that's why I thought it was a really interesting concept, because it's solving a problem that I actually haven't really seen solved before, especially in this way. Obviously, there's other ways to solve this problem, and depending on your use cases, you know, whatever works for you is obviously the right solution. But yeah, this is really cool. And so the other thing that I want to say about this this styled asset component is this uses the app framework, and in my opinion, this is actually a more intermediate or even advanced use case, because in order to get the functionality that they've kind of theorized about, the things that they have in their designs, their concepts, it's possible. That's the thing. It's totally possible. But I think, you know, if you're a beginner to the app framework or something like this is going to look a little weird to you, right? This is going to be going into areas that might be a little more unknown or kind of confusing if you don't have a good first picture of what the app framework is. But I'm gonna try to explain kind of the thought process that someone would need to go through, even if they have kind of low knowledge of what the app framework is. Kind of the thought process of how you can start to think about how to customize these kind of things. And actually what I'm hoping is this might hopefully, help people see that you can kind of dive into these different areas of the tools that we provide and really hack around and customize things to your benefit. So I think with that, let me share my screen here.
Yeah, I will pull it up for you.
Sure.
Yep, there you go.
So I guess first and foremost, of course, what you'll want to do is, and I've gone over this many times in the past, is as a developer or like an admin of an organization, you need to create, you need to go into your organization settings and go into the apps area.
Mm-hmm.
So this area is where you almost always get started when you're building an app, especially a front-end app in Contentful. So something that shows up in the Contentful UI using the app framework needs an app definition.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would come into the organization settings and you'd come to this apps page to create that app definition so you can get started working on things. Now, I feel like I've kind of already gone over this a few times, and we do have a lot of documentation around it. So I'm not going to go too much into detail of what I'm doing here. But what I will say is that kind of what I've done right before this is I've created this styled assets app definition. And since I'm just in general development mode, I'm pointing it at my local machine here. I'm pointing it at localhost, and I'm taking over that rich text field, right? So that's pretty much all I need in order to kind of start my development of building an app. And once this app definition is created, right, I hit the save button, I hit the create button, then I've got it and I can actually start to use it in my space. So if I go back into my space and I go over to the apps section of my space, this is the in-app marketplace. This is where I can install private and public apps. You can see we have all of our third-party integrations here as well. And again, if you're curious about how we've built most of these, a lot of these are in our GitHub repo. It's like Contentful apps or something like this in GitHub.
Yeah, I'll toss it in the comments.
Thanks. Yeah. And what you can do is you can check out the code that we've used to write these apps. It's very straightforward. We use all of our own tools and our own APIs, and it's really just us composing those things together to build these apps. And that's what you do really anytime you build an app. So what I've done is I've installed my styled assets app here. It didn't have any configuration, and I'm just installed it. And for development purposes, it's pretty bare bones. I haven't actually written too much code yet.
Yeah, you were saying off screen that this is basically comparable to just doing a create app using the command line tool.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's basically what they've done, what I've done. So we run the create Contentful app command line tool. What it does is it spins up a React app project for us, and it provides specific files and directories that allow us to dig into the fields that will actually populate inside of Contentful. So we don't have to do too much extra legwork. We can just kind of get to the business logic. But along those lines, so what I've got is a content model in this space. This space is a demo space, so this content model is fairly arbitrary. I wouldn't worry too much about these things, but what we're going to focus on today is the article content type. And the article content type is extremely simple. I'm keeping things simple because I'm looking at this from a developer perspective right now, which is I've been tasked with taking this rich text content field right here. And what I'm going to ultimately do is, instead of using our default rich text editor, I'm going to use our styled assets editor in the end, right? We're going to have something that actually provides the custom functionality because the default one doesn't have that very cool, if I can zoom back in on this, our default rich text editor doesn't have this custom CSS class here.
Yeah, I think this is great, especially since this is, like you're saying, like kind of a more advanced way of doing things. Let's keep it simple and let's keep it focused.
Yeah, I think so. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if we're going to make it this far. Especially, we're going to leave the styling for last. That's for sure, which is ironic because this is a component.
I feel like the styling part is actually probably the easiest part. It's load in a bunch of definitions, instance parameters, and then consuming it on the front end. It's the other stuff that I'm worried about.
Yeah, and actually what I want to focus on is kind of less of actually, we are going to build this app, but what I want to focus on is really the thought process that goes into figuring out how our tools can actually be, inspected and kind of deconstructed in a way that actually allows you to reconstruct them. It's kind of like taking apart the Legos and putting it back together in the way you want. To build these things, to get this custom functionality without straying too far off of the default functionality, right? This still looks like your general rich text editor. The people that use Contentful are not going to be too confused, but they will see like this, some small changes and improvements.
Yeah, definitely.
So again, I'm just attacking this from a developer perspective. I don't really care about having, a crazy content model or anything like that. I've just set up a custom space here with a content type that has a rich text editor. And let's just take a look at, what that actually looks like.
So this is just the default rich text editor. This isn't the styled one yet.
Right. So this is the default rich text editor. This is what people will see when they, just load up Contentful for the first time, or if they've been using Contentful for a while and they just need the rich text. This is what they're going to be seeing.
Yeah.
And again, we already have the ability to include assets and things like that. So this is an asset that I've got published in Contentful. This is not external. This is, in my media section up here of Contentful. And so what I can do is I can build a UI around this that latches onto all of this functionality. And that's where I can then start to break it down, deconstruct it, and add in the, customizations that I want. So before
I'd love for you to pull up maybe the JSON blob that we're saving as well, because like we're going to be, like you said, we're kind of just changing the view of what's being interpreted. Maybe we can take a quick look at like what this data is actually looking like from like a raw perspective behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that was one of the next steps I was looking to do.
Maybe we can just jump into the GraphQL playground or something to just get the object really quickly.
Yeah. I don't have that set up, but what I'll do is I'll just console log out the data as just a JSON object. But actually, I like that you brought up that point, because I think, you're experienced with Contentful, but maybe people that are less experienced, they don't realize that they can think about these different fields in terms of JSON, right? Everything behind the scenes under the hood here is just JSON objects, which can be manipulated to your benefit.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone about that this weekend. Was they were trying to get like just the first 50 words of the rich text field, and it was like, well, let's take a look at what happens before you put it into the HTML renderer, and they were pleasantly surprised, and that made it pretty easy for them.
Yeah, I think that's, if more people just understood kind of those basic concepts of just the underlying JSON it's just all a data structure underneath. From a developer perspective, right, it's actually really easy to reason about these things. It's like, how do I get the first 50 words? Oh, well, I know that this is actually just going to be a value property inside of a JSON object. So I just need to grab like a substring. So when you start to think about it in those terms, it starts to become a little bit more clear. And again, we'll visualize. I'll throw up what the console log looks like so we can see what this actually looks like. But ultimately, these things are just represented in JSON, which means we can add attributes and metadata and things like that. So what I've got, I'm going to pull up Visual Studio here. And what I've got, and if you followed the app framework talks I've done in the past, we've got just your basic create Contentful app here. And it's spit out all of the generic structure. So I've got a components directory here that lists out all the different components that would show up in the Contentful locations where my app would show up. So in this case, I'm specifically focusing on that field location here. This is where the rich text editor comes into play. And I've already, Alan and his team has already kind of implemented something here. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I like that we've already got important stuff like on value changed and like those things that I feel like I always forget to remember to implement on value change and those kinds of things. And so this is nice that it's already there. I'm imagining if we move into some other levels, there'll be some other stuff for us here too.
Right. So yeah, actually what's really interesting is the reason I'm doing this on value change here is to just show what the field that the rich text editor spits back is going to be.
Oh, this is something you did, not just from the Create React app.
Right. Sorry. This is something I did. But what's really interesting is this is also custom code down here on line 18 in this return statement. but custom in the sense that all we did was import yet another Contentful package, the rich text editor, and use it as the display, the render of this field. And as you can see, if I just get rid of, let me just comment this out for a second so it doesn't actually contribute to our functionality there. So we just have the rich text editor, which is an open source component. It's a React component, open source, provided by Contentful. And actually, this React component is, for all intents and purposes, really the same thing that you see right here in the default.
Yeah,
exact same thing. Which means, of course, the consequences of that are if we ever find bugs in our actual editor, the one that we use by default, we fix those, we push those, and then if you import newer versions of rich text editor, you'll get those bug fixes. So I've got this. I just wanted to save a little bit of time, but I'll just catch everyone up here. So what I've done is in my terminal, I'm going to start this process. It's going to run behind the scenes. Again, this is just a create React app kind of under the hood with Contentful flavoring. And what's going to happen is we're going to run this development server. It's going to be localhost 3000. And what I'm going to do is in Contentful, I'm going to now swap out this default text editor for our custom app. So back in the content model, I'm going to go to my article content type, and in the field, the text field settings, where we have the rich text editor, I'm going to instead use my styled assets app. And again, the reason this is showing up is because previously I'd created the app definition, I installed it to the space, so now it's going to show up. This space recognizes that there's this thing called styled assets. Okay, so let me just save that. And back in my content and in my article here, well, you see nothing has really changed.
Well, the font's changed. The font is different.
The font has, that's a good eye. That's a good catch. That could even be a bug. I'm not sure.
Maybe you're just misimporting a formatting or something. So
that could be it.
Sure, it's not important.
It also could be it could be on purpose, right? Now that I have control over this field, I can make the font whatever I want if I really want to. I can style these things the way I want. So I guess just to kind of prove that this truly is actually now a custom component, and I'm not pulling the wool over your eyes here, let's just kind of quickly add a little bit of an addition to our component here. So along with rendering the rich text, I'm also going to just render a very quick hello world here. And let me just catch up on my grammar.
I think you got drop line 19 as well.
Sorry, what's that?
Drop line 19.
Drop line
or
19.
Put something in line 19.
Yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm just creating a fragment here. Otherwise, React is going to yell at me for having kind of loose elements. So here we've got hello world showing up before our editor. So we do have control over this editor indeed. And so that's what's happening here. We've got this div of hello world and the rich text editor. So what you were saying before, Shai, was let's take a look at what actually the rich text editor is doing when it passes data from Contentful to the user and vice versa, right? So what I'm accessing here, just to explain, is that I've got props, and inside my props, this is React kind of syntax here. So I'm passing in a method. I'm passing in the SDK methods, which is another thing that we provide when you use this create Contentful app. You don't need to use create Contentful app to access the SDK. We provide just a vanilla JavaScript library that you can plug into any kind of business or UI logic that you have. And what it does is it gives you methods to access various points of data inside of Contentful. And that allows you to commingle that with your custom code. So here what I've got is I'm specifically accessing the field that we're in. So I have specific access points to the field that we're in, which is that text field with the rich text editor. And I've got this event listener called onValueChange, which takes a callback. So every time I update the data inside of the rich text editor, it's going to pass me that data. And of course, I can do something with that data, right? I can make a network call and go to some URL with that data, right? I can pass that data in a network call. I can console log it like I'm doing here.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever you do with data, this obviously gives you the means to do it in an asynchronous fashion. So for me, I'll console log that data, and what we'll see is that
quickly before we do that, we got a comment from Mark Struct that says that there's a bug in Create Contentful app, and all we need to do to fix the font is just manually import Contentful Forma 36 token index.css. It's in the StreamYard if you want to just copy paste it into the index.tsx file. I feel like since this is a bug, a few people besides us might be running into this.
It's potentially possible. I mean, so what I've got here is the index CSS imported, which means that the bug might need a little bit more looking at, unless I'm missing something here.
Yeah, it looks like there's got to be the Contentful Forma 36 token dist CSS index.css is the full import.
Gotcha. So it's something I'm not necessarily importing in this file, which is not getting imported correctly in the thing. I think I'm just gonna. I mean, if
it's not hugely important, but it's a good shout out just in case anyone watching is running into a similar problem and is hoping that we fixed it on stream. That's how Mark would recommend that we go through it. So, but let's keep going.
I totally agree. I'm kind of ignoring the styling for now because I want to talk about the functionality. But yeah, let me just quickly touch upon. So when you do create a Contentful app, you do get a lot of this. Bootstrapping type code, I guess I'll call it, which does most of the stuff for you. In many cases, you don't even have to touch this file. But this is a good call out. So this is where we import kind of a global CSS file, which styles our code. And if we wanted to add some global styles or import some fonts, for example, from like Google Fonts or something like that, this would probably be the place to do it. And that is also, as pointed out, where the bug fix would probably end up going. Cool. So
let's take a look at that console log.
Yeah. So I'm console logging the data that's coming out of the rich text editor because I've got access to it via the JavaScript. So let me open up a console here. And so again, this is probably going to get a little noisy as I type. I think there's a slight delay on it just to ensure that doesn't get too noisy. But let's say here is some more text. Okay, so there is a slight delay, but you can see my console logs are coming through.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're talking about when we talk about the underlying data structure of the rich text editor. It's just a fancy way of saying there's a JavaScript object that represents everything you see on this page. And so you can see there's definitely, a method to the madness here. There is an organization of the data that makes sense. And of course, when you are rendering this data on your presentation layer, your marketing website, whatever it is, you obviously need to write code or use a library that understands this data type, the shape of this data, to be able to, show this in a way that makes sense to the user.
Yeah, and most folks are probably using the rich text renderer that we provide, the rich text to HTML renderer. And I believe that there's a version of that for basically every one of the languages that we have an SDK for as well.
Right.
And we've done some other streams on that earlier, actually with a few. I think Alan, we talked about rich text a little bit as well. If folks are curious.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge topic to dive into, and again, like I made a disclaimer. We might not even get finished.
Yeah, we're kind of like crossing two big things here, right? Like we're crossing both rich text and apps, and both of them, I think, getting familiar with both of those two things are ways that you can level up the experiences for your editorial teams. And so now, since we're doing them together, it's like another level up kind of experience. But yeah, I saw you started kind of investigating the object. What are you seeing there? What's something that we should be noticing?
Yeah, so someone who's actually not too familiar with the rich text data structure, I think that just coming in here and inspecting what's going on will give you a better idea of how we actually set all of this stuff up. And so, as a curious developer myself, usually what I do is I see that there's this array of content. So already I'm thinking about this, and now in terms of, okay, there must be like paragraphs and lines and different node types. Actually, that's what they're actually called, node types, that represent or at least give a hint to the developer of how they should actually style these things, right?
Yep.
This is where the open-endedness comes in, because of course we provide these node types via rich text, but just because you see the word paragraph doesn't mean you have to style a paragraph. And this is the kind of thinking that's involved when you start to question, like, hey, how can I get an image asset to have more custom metadata, right? I have to kind of start to break down the boundaries of node type being paragraph and start to think, hey, maybe I can create a custom node type or something like this that can contain the data that I need in order to render it on my website. Because again, I'm in control of both sides of this thing here, which means that I can, manipulate the data in a way that I see fit.
Yeah, this is interesting. So the way I would kind of think about this is on the front end, on the rich text renderer, the renderer will take this and turn it into a p tag, like a standard HTML p tag, and then I can be like, hey, render, when you get a paragraph, I want you to, the p tag is fine, but also give me this additional CSS, and like kind of teach the renderer what I want as well, and kind of pop it up as well.
Yeah,
so
right. Exactly. And again, like, that's for if you're on a website, but let's say you're using Contentful to render something in a native, when I say native, I mean like an iOS or Android scenario. This is not necessarily going to translate to a p tag, right? Depends on what if you're using React Native or something, maybe there's some kind of concept like that.
That's the easy way.
Right. But again, this is just an identifier for a developer to then understand, how do I translate this into the language or into the framework that I'm using in order to make this data more meaningful.
Exactly.
So again, I'm just going to dive in a little bit more. So I see that really what we have is we have content within content. So we've got a two-dimensional array here, and inside that there's even more data and node types. So I can start to see that this is really kind of a classic data structure. It almost looks it looks recursive to me, in the sense that there's node types within node types. So I can start to think about how I would render these things or manipulate these things. There's different tools at my disposal that I could use.
Just to showcase it, would you be able to maybe do some styling to like some of the words, maybe underline the second sentence, or bold the word here or something? And we can see kind of how the object changes.
Let's do that. So you can see that what I've got, what I've dived into here is there was some text here, here's some more. So this is kind of the main paragraph, this first paragraph here that I'm highlighting. So what happens when we bold it, right?
Well, I was going to say, if we could do like a partial bolding, like don't bold the whole thing, like bold like the middle of it or something.
Okay, good
underline
idea.
The middle of it.
Okay, let's do that.
Because right now it's a giant object with the entire thing, so big that it's actually getting truncated in your console.
Gotcha. So what happens when I decide to bold, let's say, 2 words in one sentence of one paragraph, right?
Let's see it.
Let's see what that looks like. So again, I'll dive into the paragraph. I'll go into the content. So it looks like actually the way it works is it starts to break up the content based off of something that's going on. So again, as a developer, let's say I was completely from scratch implementing a way to render the rich text editor. I would see that actually what I need to do is I need to start to iterate over the content, read each data object that I find. Again, if it's not a nested array, if it's a nested array, I need to probably do some recursion or something like this. But once I get down into the data itself and I see that there's actually a data object with a node type, I can see what the value is, and I can see if it has anything on it. So this one seems like there's really nothing.
No marks,
going on,
no anything.
Right. There, it's just there was. But then as I get to some text here, okay, look, there's marks.
That array has something in it. Let's take a look. That's bold.
Bold. Okay. So this is me starting to really understand how this actually works. So basically, I guess from a high level, I should be iterating over every piece of content. So when the data comes in, it's going to give me pieces of content. And I need to iterate over those pieces of content. And just, if I want to be very specific about the way I display this data, I need to check if marks has any, things in there. I probably need to check if data has anything in there. And actually, that's probably what we're going to end up using to get that custom CSS property, right?
So should we maybe click into the embedded asset and take a look at that?
Yeah, let's take a look, because the embedded asset is something that actually makes use of the data type as opposed to just being a piece of content itself.
Yeah.
So let me just close this for a little more clarity. So what I've done is you can see that we've got paragraph, embedded asset, and a couple more paragraph blocks, which indeed are
I'm
just
assuming those are just going to be empty line breaks or something.
Right.
Like,
It looks like if I'm clicking around here, these are empty line breaks, which again, I think is important to note, because actually it is still important information, right? We should, if we're rendering this and the editors are true to form, we technically should render 4 more line breaks after the asset, right? So even no data or no content.
No data is still data.
Right.
Like empty lines are still something. So.
Right. So, we do have to be careful. And this is, again, why this is kind of a more intermediate to advanced, I would say, topic, is because there's a lot of edge cases here. There's a lot of things that you need to consider when you're building something like this. And what I'm trying to do, again, is just start from the very beginning and see how we would actually even start to conceptualize and actually implement something.
Yeah.
So, let's look at this embedded asset block node type. And in it, I see that there's actually no content, but there is data. And it looks like there's a target and a sys, which is very.
That looks very familiar. I feel very comfortable here. This is getting into territory I'm happy with.
So this is telling me that I have some kind of an asset and it's got some kind of an ID. And most likely what I'll need to do is I'll need to use the API to render this asset. And I think this is, excuse me, I think this makes a lot of sense, right? Because the rich text editor, when it sends data over the wire to say your marketing website or whatever, it doesn't necessarily want to send all the data, right? Again, like that example you gave where someone wanted to just get the first 50 words of text. It's kind of nice in that regard, especially if there's performance concerns involved, where you don't necessarily want to download like every piece of data in the rich text editor just to get the first 50 words of text. And not to mention, you probably could build an app that automatically writes to a different field in that content type to just have the first 50 words as you fill in the rich text editor.
Hides it, kind of like the slug field, but like a hidden slug field or something like that.
Right. So there's actually many ways to attack that problem depending on your use cases. But so here we've got an embedded asset block. And I actually have a few questions about this. And again, I'm looking at this from the perspective of a developer that doesn't really know much about how this rich text thing works. I really only know what I see here, and it is making sense to me to some degree. But here are my questions. First of all, can I implement a custom node type? Right? Can I make something that works and functions very similarly to an asset, but actually holds more data? And the reason why I'd want to make it a custom node type is because then when I go to when I make the API calls to actually render this stuff, I can key off that custom node type and know that I need to look for like maybe more than just the sys property. Maybe I'm going to add more data points than just target, for example.
And that way you can also, I imagine if you click on the embed drop down in the actual rich text editor, you could add, you've got entry, inline asset, and we could do styled asset or something like that. So if an editor was fine with the default, they could just use the default. And if an editor needed to do the specific customization, they could explicitly call out the specific customization and have the two different experiences there.
Absolutely. I think that's a good call out. I mean, again, and this is going to be an advanced use case, what you're describing, but it's possible because we know that the component that I'm using here, this entire component, is custom code that I've loaded in, which means it's custom code that I can also manually edit.
Before we keep going, we've got a couple comments. We have a question from Walpolia, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Probably getting ahead, but is there some API layer on top of the rich text data structure that makes it easy to traverse /parse /modify, like a node.getMarks?
Yeah, so we do offer, I believe in JavaScript, we offer a rich text library. And what it does is, this is if you're outside of Contentful and you're calling Contentful API data. This is the data you're going to receive, right? At the end of the day, it's going to be wrapped in a Contentful API response. So there's going to be some higher level, some metadata around it. But at the end of the day, when you actually go to render this content on your website, for example, this is the data structure you're going to be getting. And I know I mentioned, you need to start thinking about this in terms of 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional arrays and recursiveness. But we do have a JavaScript library that actually does all of that for you. And in fact, it already does understand the ability to implement custom node types. So I did know that beforehand, but I am attacking this problem as, if I'm questioning, can I implement custom node types? That would be something I would look into. And indeed it is possible.
Yeah. And even if you aren't, if it is just JSON. And so if you're, importing this into Python, all of the default Python, sorry, I can't speak, Python like JSON manipulation stuff would work and apply. And you could use the standard JSON tooling to go about and investigate this object, do whatever you need to the object, and then then punt it over to the renderer to do that conversion, or write your own renderer and do the rendering completely manually if you needed to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure on the robustness of other libraries.
Yeah, I wouldn't write a custom renderer unless like I had a very specific need to do it. I think the one that we provide is really solid. But
yeah, and of course we use it ourselves, so we're bug fixing it. But that being said, that's absolutely right? Like, so any language, any programming language that can interpretate JSON to some degree, and convert it
Which either I think is all of them at this point. I hope it's all of them.
It's a very standard way of
maybe basic on your calculator is struggling a little bit, but
yeah. So I mean, in most real world examples, right? Like 99% of the time, you're going to be able to transmute this into some kind of data structure that works in your language, and so you'll be able to manipulate it. And I'm fairly confident that there's already developers that have worked on open sourcing libraries to handle kind of the generic rich text protocol.
Cool. All right.
I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. And then we've got a comment from Tim just saying it took Tim T a little bit to figure out how to use the custom renderer. And that Mark was saying that they filed a token for that styling issue as well, or filed a bug for the token issue. But yeah, let's keep going. Let's so now we've inspected the data. We have a good sense of what's going on here. What do you think is the first place that we should attack to start implementing this, or are we even ready to do that? Is there more that we need to look at before we can start working on the modifications?
Well, yeah, so I think there's two ways to attack this problem here, and just for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into the more advanced way, which is unfortunately kind of that it's this, right? This is the more advanced way to attack the problem, because what this entails, in order to get actually a UI into the rich text editor itself, what this entails is actually diving into the open source code of the rich text editor itself and modifying that to do what you want. Okay. I think what we can do kind of on a more basic level here is show how to implement the functionality without diving too deep into a refactor of, say, this rich text editor.
Maybe we could do the data version, and then we can bring Alex Sukalov from the Contentful team, who helped create that custom or helped set up the open source custom kind of extensibility version in January or something. Alex would be
really cool. I don't know if it's public knowledge, but he did a lot to really refactor and almost kind of reinvent what we have, because of course, in the old days, we'd built this rich text editor straight into the Contentful product itself. And, to open source it is no small feat. He has to, think about all of the edge cases, think about how developers are going to attack the problem once they get their hands on the code, which is what we're doing right now, right? We're probably going to stretch the limits of what Alex has worked on here.
So let's get the app stuff going then, and we'll save the open source rich text editor for later. So
cool. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to do is, again, because I'm console logging this data here, it means I have access to this data. And because I have access to this data, I can also manually save the data if I want. I do not need to rely specifically on the rich text editor to save the data for me if I want to do some kind of customization to it. So let's kind of back up for a second here, and I'm going to jump back into the code. And instead of rendering the rich text editor, let's go ahead and actually just print this data straight to, I would say, let's just print it straight into the window so we can see it right away. So the first things first is I'm going to create a rich text data, creating a variable here where we'll save the data and we'll actually render it out to the page.
Yeah.
So in effect, what I'm doing is I'm creating a very I don't know, I guess a very useless version of the rich text editor, let's say. So I'm going to use state here, and I will call this a object. And of course, from React, I need to import use state. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is, again, instead of rendering this rich text editor, let me comment this out. And instead, let's just have a div that renders the rich text data. And because it's going to be an object, we'll do JSON stringify.
Yeah.
All right. And close that up, make it nice and semantic. And when the component mounts, I'm going to do props SDK field get value, and this is getting the value of the field. And this will return to me the value of the field, right? And what I'll do is I'll take that value and I'll set it as the rich text data. Okay. Let's see if okay, yeah.
There we go.
So there it is. And actually, just really quickly, just to have a little bit more clarity, I think if I do this right here in the JSON stringify, it will allow for, I believe it should allow for some kind of styling. No, I guess it's not working, but that's okay. I could have sworn there was.
Let me pull up the documentation really quickly. You keep going, and I'll see if I can find it easily.
Yeah. Okay. So this can be null, and this can be a string or a number undefined. Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because this could also just be a styling issue inside.
Yeah, it's supposed to be object null 2. It's the third argument that enables pretty printing.
Yeah, so I've got null 2 here. So okay, you know what? Let's skip that. All it will do is just add white spaces so we could see the, like kind of like how I see in the console here. That's basically how we would see it written out here, but that's okay. We don't need to worry about that too much. So what I want to do is I want to make I want to make a mechanism that actually allows me to look for specifically this embedded asset here, let's say. Before we work on custom node types and all that, let's see if I can actually save on my embedded asset block just something on that data object.
Yeah.
This again, I'm a curious developer. I'm seeing if it's going to throw any errors if I try something like this. So again, let's hard code this just to speed things up and get straight to the point. So in the data, there's going to be a content object. And in the content object is an array. So in the data, right?
Yeah.
Let's log that. In the data, there's going to be a content object, which is an array. And at position 1 of the array, there's this embedded asset block, which has a data attribute.
You want to drop the other one? Yep, there we go.
And actually, what I will do is I will move this console log out and just have it log when it gets rendered. And this is going to be rich text data. Of course, this is going to yell at me, so let's just do a TS ignore real quick. Because I know that should, or at least I think I know that should be the thing that gets accessed. Although it looks like I've probably already messed up.
Are you calling it too early? Maybe after the
it's quite possible, right? So let's
like
do
checking in
if
the use effect or
rich
something.
text data, if content in rich text data, then we'll do this. And so, of course, we're having some errors, but let me reload.
Content does not exist.
That's okay. It will exist. We'll make it exist. So let me reload the frame here.
Oh, that's a nifty trick. You can force it to reload via. Is that just a Chrome thing or it's Chrome iframe stuff?
Yeah,
or
technically it's a Chrome iframe stuff, but yeah, let me just to go off on a real quick side tangent here. This right here is an iframe. So again, apps are just
iframes.
They're just iframes, and Chrome does allow you to reload iframes without reloading the entire page.
That's nifty.
Yeah, I find that really useful for this kind of work. And what it does, so I can see here that I'm actually accessing specifically this stuff. So let's say after the component renders. After the component renders, and I get the value. Let's say after a certain amount of time, let's do like a set timeout. I want to do props.sdk.field.set value, right?
Yep.
And what I want to set the value to is something that is, and we'll do this after 5 seconds after the component loads. Let's get rid of this. What I want to set the value to is the rich text data. So let's do, new data being the rich text data. And what I want to do is I want to say that in the new data, and again, I'm just using mutation here, and depending on if you want to be immutable or not, that's up to you, but let's do content and in one, and then there is, I believe there's target, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in target, I want to add a .foo, and that's going to equal bar. So what I'm doing here is I'm seeing if I can actually just
modify the object
data. Exactly. So and I'm gonna send new data over back to Contentful.
Yep.
Via
so this should theoretically save. So when we refresh it, if we comment that set out, it'll theoretically stay there.
Theoretically, yes. I do foresee potentially. I'm trying to think of how React works in this case. I believe we won't have any scope issue problems with accessing this data, but we'll find out in a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like the hello world is still rendering. However, we've got a cannot read property of 1 of undefined. So that's that set timeout that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just go take a look. So here I actually want to quickly dive into one other cool feature, which is you can actually debug in real time. I know we do console logs most of the time, but I actually prefer using a debugger in a lot of ways because it helps me really understand what's going on.
I was going to say, this is going to be good for me. I just switched over to Visual Studio Code. I'm used to the flag debugging style, and so I'm excited to see the other way of doing it.
Yeah, I actually heavily rely on the debugger in a lot of the things I do. So here we've got in Contentful, we are allowed to access that debugger, which will mean that I can actually see what's going on here, which is really nice. And so it looks like for whatever reason, it's probably, like I said, a scope issue that rich text data is not defined anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move this timeout out of the use effect, because again, I think that was just a simple scope issue, like I mentioned. And if we refresh our page here and try again, I'm hoping we'll see the data, and then I can just confirm that I'm actually accessing the correct data from within this debugger.
Yeah.
So, again, there's no rich text data here. That's interesting. Now,
are we actually calling that? We are calling that set function in use effect. Do we need to trigger the use effect, or? Or is that just getting triggered on page load?
The use effect is getting triggered on page load here, but my suspicion is we actually were able to run this code, this new data code, which provided a blank function, a blank object here, and we've actually overwritten all of our data.
Yeah. Oh, you think we've deleted everything?
I think we've accidentally deleted everything, but there's a simple fix to that, and we can confirm that that's the case and maybe not make that mistake again. So let me get rid of that set value. That was a mistake on my part. We probably put the cart before the horse by setting value there, right? We weren't even sure exactly what we were doing. So let me go into the article. And I think this is actually good because it shows how you can really debug when you're working on apps and like kind of the escape hatches that you can go through if you run into problems.
Are you trying to convince me that you broke it on purpose here? Or
I'm trying to justify my bad
totally empty
skills. So yeah, we completely cleared out that object, right?
Oh,
so
no.
here is some new text. Here is some more. And let me actually add in an asset again. And let me publish those changes so we've actually got them saved.
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah. When you develop and you start to
this is why we have things like environments as well, because if this was a thing that you'd done on an existing service or something, you could have made sure that you were checking this out on an environment, and when you'd done something like that, you could just delete the environment and restart it, and no one would have noticed.
Yeah, exactly. And it does go to show that you do need to be careful, when you're developing a new app or something like this. Probably not the best idea to use production data, right? I'm in a demo space. I've set this up for my development purposes, so I have nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
But yeah, you definitely want to be a bit careful when you're developing, especially if you're working in a production space.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm kind of back to square one here with the warning. But let me go and hit that debugger again, just so we can see. So we see that the data is indeed there. And when the set timeout happens, okay, so we do have a problem with the set timeout. So let me add that debugger back in. And again, we've got hot reloading, which
are you diving deep enough for it is?
I might not be, and this is what the debugger is going to help me understand, right?
Well,
so rich text data does exist.
Yeah.
And so let's step over that. And so now what I want to do is I just want to make sure I'm accessing the correct stuff. So content here
is an array.
Oh, you know what? I've changed the data type, so now it's
but we should still be getting. We shouldn't be getting the error because the error is triggering that it's not finding anything at position 1.
So actually what the error was saying was it cannot find the property target on position 1, which is totally correct,
then yeah,
right?
So we should bump it to 2.
Right. So we need to bump it to 2, and I need to include the data object. Yeah. So this is why I love that inline debugger, is because it's really easy for me to see my code as it's broken. So what I need to do is I need to access data, and I need to access before I access target. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll access data before I access target. And of course, I need to change this to position 2 in the array. And let me leave the debugger in there. But what I'll do is I'll just put it after the fact, just to make sure that we actually hit it. And when we do hit it, we'll confirm that that line was able to. So we see that the changes update in real time. And we'll be able to confirm once the debugger is hit that indeed we've been able to modify the data. So if I look now at the data, we can see that in target, I do have a foo. So I am modifying it locally the way I want it to be modified. However, now here comes the big question. Will it work with set value? And again, as a developer that's just kind of figuring out how this stuff works, this is kind of how my thought process would be to figure this stuff out. So let me go ahead and update this. The property of foo is not expected.
Ooh, that's interesting. We are getting a
server error. So what's really cool now is that I'm actually now interacting with Contentful, right? Contentful is telling me I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, which in a way is very nice because, I'm not accidentally sending information to Contentful that's going to break our entire structure. And I don't think anyone would expect for that to even be the case in general.
Can we take a look at the console and see if the console is giving us any more detail on what the...
Sure. So it looks like to me what's happening is we've got a 422, which is indicating that we've got some kind of malformed response going on here. So in the network tab, let me make this a little bit bigger, and I'll just filter by XHR.
The 422 is red as well. It's right there.
Right. So the 422, this was a put. So this again was me calling, just to understand how we even got to this point. Set value under the hood is making a network call to our API, to the space, to this entry with the new data. And you can see all that happening right here, right? You can see what I've done. It's organized the data in such a way that makes sense to Contentful. And so if I look at the preview of the message, we do have some developer details here, which do manifest themselves in the UI for the regular user to be able to see. But here we just get a slightly more, let me make this even a little bit bigger. We get a slightly more detailed explanation for what's going wrong here. So the property of foo is unexpected. To us, that's no surprise because we just tried to add it. So that's, that's not confusing, I would say. And it's telling us exactly where we tried to add it, right? This is really cool. It was on the field of this entry in this locale, in this content type. It goes all the way down into target, basically. So that's really cool. For the developer, we get a more detailed response. And in fact, while we're here, let me just point one thing out, which is if you're a developer and you think you're running into an error response and the error itself is erroneous, as in you think this shouldn't be an error, or you're not understanding why this is an error and the message is not good. Well, if you contact customer support, you can always provide this request ID. And it's a way for us to actually really understand what happened in the full path, kind of in the black box area of Contentful, to kind of get a better idea of what went wrong.
Yeah.
So when you're really, really stuck working on these things as a developer, this request ID is actually can be a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel for you. It just requires reaching out to support and having them investigate further.
Yeah. So I think I might have found our problem. I pulled up the rules of rich text, which are in the developer documentation. And the last rule of the rules of rich text is that custom node types, data properties, and marks are not allowed.
Custom data properties and marks are not allowed.
Custom node types, data properties, and marks are not allowed.
Got you. So what you're saying is actually the node type is not able to be changed.
That's my read of reading this documentation, but I'm wondering if there's a way around it. Maybe we could store it in the, I don't know, maybe in the description field of the asset or something like that, or which isn't amazing, but
well, I think, again, thinking about this problem as a developer and thinking about how this is laid out, this is certainly a road bump for us, but it's not something that's impassable, right?
Definitely
I think when we look at what design wants and what developers say is actually possible is always going to be not quite the same thing. And this is probably a good example of that. So what we've got is actually like this inline CSS class thing. And
while we're here, we just had someone, it looks like Stefan dropped out for a little bit and wants to know what we're building. Since we're at the hour 30 mark, if we have maybe some stragglers joining, maybe we could do a quick refresh of where we're at, and then we can keep going.
Sure, yeah. So what we're trying to accomplish today is we've kind of gotten to the point, for those of you that are joining, the beginning half of our session, we talked about the brainstorming of how we go from having a lot of ideas about what kind of apps we want to build into actually conceptualizing an app that to us makes sense and is useful for our users. So I'm going to skip the first couple of parts here because that's just, your kind of.
I think we can go straight into the image of what Alan kind of mocked up for us earlier on stream.
Okay, yeah. So here's what we've basically boiled it down to is that we want a rich text editor that has the ability to add custom attributes to an asset And in other words, what that means is we want an image to have custom CSS on it, right? That's one way of looking at custom attributes on an asset, an image that has custom CSS on it. And kind of what they've come to a decision on is a custom rich text editor that looks like the normal rich text editor that Contentful provides, but instead has a bit of a different approach when it comes to adding assets. So you can see here, this is the normal inline editor right here on my screen. And in their proposed solution, in the concept designs, we've got an editor that shows assets, but also includes this extra text box here. And in our use case, we'd put CSS classes in, specifically Tailwind classes, which is what they were using for their product. But you can think about this as just a place to put metadata in, right? So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And basically what we've done is we've gotten to the point where we've created a very bad looking app, right? We've gone through the developer flow of how to think about this problem. So once product has conceptualized and said, like, this is what we want to achieve, now it's up to us developers to kind of figure out how it's actually going to be achieved, right, in the code. So what we've done is we've created an app. We've gone through the process of getting an app rendering in the screen. I'm in developer mode here, so this is a demo.
We're just looking at the data. We don't any of the fancy bells and whistles yet. We just want to see what's going on, and can we edit it?
Right. And so in this case, again, because the data structure is underlying JSON, it's just a very specific pattern that we call rich text.
Yep.
We have access to modify it. In this case, you're saying that based off of our documentation, we might not have
if you want to pull up the rich text concept doc, so that's developers/doc/concept/rich text. There's a rules of rich text section that maybe we can take a quick look at.
/doc/what?
/concepts/rich-text.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and there's a rules of rich text section that I was looking at that I think might have be where our issue is coming from. It's near the bottom of the page. Yeah, right there. Gotcha. Rules of rich text. So this is what the rich text spec is for folks that are curious, especially if you're trying to make a custom renderer. This is a good spec, so you can get an idea of what's coming in.
Yeah, so it says here that text can have marks, which there's supported.
That's like
marks.
the strong, the bold, the underlined, the H6 kind of stuff that we were talking about earlier in the stream.
Right. And here I see that there's a big glaring problem, which is custom node types, data properties, and marks are not allowed. Right. So we do have a limitation here.
Yep.
But I don't think that's going to stop us from achieving the functionality.
Oh, definitely not. I think we can get past this pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think I already even have an idea of what we're going to do. But, what that means, I think, is unfortunately we may not be able to come fully to terms with this proposed concept design, although it looks cool. And maybe, again, these things are open source, so maybe in the future we could even add this in.
Yeah.
But for now, what we're going to have to do is work a little bit around this, right? So putting on our developer thinking cap, we're going to say... we've got, what we've got is a rich text field here. And what I'm doing is hacking it to just show the underlying data structure, right? This is what happens.
This is basically the same thing as a console log.
Right. I'm console logging the data here. But this is the data structure that's used to power the rich text editor itself, right? So what I can do is I can always mimic or copy or look at the data from other fields in a content type. That is to say, if I have multiple fields in an entry, the fields can interact with each other. And we see that happen, for example, with the slug field or the title field sometimes, right? If you say upload an image and you don't provide a title right away, we'll automatically fill in that field.
Yeah.
You have access to the same kind of functionality. So if you want to have fields that have programmatically generated data, or kind of a mixture of human and programmatically generated data, it's totally possible.
Oh yeah.
So what we did was we dived into what the data structure looks like. We saw that there's node types and paragraphs and things like that. And unfortunately, we're coming to the conclusion that we can't edit these things straight up. As you can see, I tried to edit something, I was ignoring what the docs said, and I said, let me just try it anyways.
That's what we get for not starting with the documentation, starting by.
Sometimes this is good because it shows us that, okay, maybe we have to do a little bit more reading.
This is also how I do most of my development is I change things first and documentation second. And so I'm glad that you and I are the same development mindset.
I think that's it. It's like playing with Legos. You just keep trying stuff out until you get the product you want. And in this case, what we're seeing is the concept itself is, it's not impossible. We're not going to trash it. We're just going to do it a little bit differently, right? Which is to say that in another field, let me go into the content model here and into the article. Let me get rid of this so there's more space.
Yeah. Add a field.
Yeah. So let me add a field here. And when we're working with, sorry.
Oh no, go for it. Go for it.
I was just going to say, when we're working with custom data structures, or when we're like in the developer mode thinking about metadata structures, the easiest way
There's one field that I want.
Yeah, there really is kind of one option for most of this more complicated stuff, and that's the JSON object field.
I find even when I'm doing simple apps, I still end up using JSON just because I'm a huge fan of JSON. This is funny. We got a funny comment from Ashley that's documentation. What's that? So it sounds like Ashley agrees with us here. But
documentation. Let's see. It's something I spend a lot of time writing, and I get
very little time reading. Yeah, let's do it. Let's go with JSON.
Okay, so I'm going to just name this. Let's name this the asset
metadata or something.
Metadata field. It's whatever. This is custom. You can do what you want. Create and configure. So here, what I want to do is create and configure. And the appearance. So here's the thing, right? The appearance, I'll leave it as an object for now.
Yeah.
But the rich text editor, when we were originally building this app, we thought we would actually apply the app to the rich text editor itself. Not
to interrupt you again, but we have a question and we have an Alan. So I'm going to add Alan back to the stream first. Hey, Alan, how's it going?
Hey, great.
Yeah.
So,
And
what did I miss?
Yeah, you just missed us recapping what we've been doing.
Awesome. Okay, so like, how bad is it?
It's
like
we're coming up with some solutions. So we've realized. Let me give you a quick TLDR before we answer Stefan's question.
Oh, great.
But it turns out that neither myself nor David had read the rich text documentation, and it sounds like we can't actually modify the rich text spec. So what we're doing is we're adding an additional JSON object where we're going to be holding the metadata as well. And we've been kind of turning off the views and looking at things kind of behind the scenes. So right now, rich text is just raw data, and that's kind of how we're messing with things and making sure that things work. That makes sense?
Fascinating. Yeah.
Cool. And then Stefan's question is, are you saying, David, that you want to use JSON to rebuild your own rich text field?
In this case, no, not really. In my mind, I'm actually going to keep the rich text field the way it is. And I'm going to use this asset metadata field as a way to augment the content inside that field in a specific way. And I think what's really important to note about this is earlier on, I mentioned that the cool thing, or the very important thing about this design right here, is that it encapsulates a piece of metadata inside of a context, right? There's a CSS class that's attached to this asset, but it's not attached to the asset globally. It's attached to the asset in its context, which is in the context of this article, this rich text field. So I want to kind of stay true to the idea of that. And that is to say, I want to make sure that the field that I'm creating here, the asset metadata field, is not applying any kind of metadata globally to the asset, but instead giving me, the developer, the ability to target the context still and get the same functionality out of it. So kind of just to give you a heads up, Alan, in short, what I'm saying is the concept design is really cool and the implementation is not going to look
I actually think
quite
we can
like
get
that.
pretty close. I think we can get pretty close.
We can absolutely get the functionality.
Yeah.
I think what we're running into is simply the display issue here, which is having this thing actually show up inside the rich text editor. I'm not saying it's impossible. There actually might be something we're not.
You might
I'm
need
kinda
a
feeling-
different container.
It would be a different node type, and what we're finding is we actually can't customize the node types, or at least not in the way that we want to. But that's not to say that maybe there's something we're missing. It would.
Yeah, I feel like you
definitely
could
take a deeper
group.
dive.
You could do something similar to like the grouping of two fields, and you would just hide the second field, so no editors would see it at all, and you would have the. But maybe that's something when we bring Alex on to help us with the open source rich text editor, we can explore. One more question from Stefan: are we sure about the rich text editor not working on top of a JSON field? It would just be cool. Hashtag thinking out loud. And Stefan, I hate you for making me say a hashtag as a word.
So we are thinking about it in that way. In fact, that's exactly how the rich text editor is implemented anyways, right?
Yeah.
If I wanted to re-implement the rich text editor right now, it would be just using this JSON model that we saw printed on the page. And my guess is the way Alex would attack this problem is he would modify the rich text editor itself to have the ability to look at a help field, right? Kind of like a auxiliary field, which in this case would be asset metadata. What you could do is you could also combine that all into one field, right? Because we're working with JSON, all we would do is take that rich text JSON object and put it into a bigger object. And the bigger object would then have the asset metadata field in it.
That's an interesting idea too.
Right. So that would actually be a way of getting around having two literal fields in Contentful and only needing one literal field in Contentful. But again, these are the different ways you can attack the problem. And again, we're also giving you the tools to do it, because if I decided to have this asset metadata JSON object also be the rich text itself, then that's totally possible, right? All I would need to do is, instead of having the rich text editor be the only thing that's rendered, which again, we're not even doing anyways, is I would have the metadata field get rendered along with the rich text editor, and they would kind of interact with each other in this portion of the code. So what you'd basically have is you'd have the valid rich text JSON that goes into the editor, and the editor returns valid rich text JSON. And when I say valid, I mean, abiding by the rules that Contentful has set up here. But that's not to say that my custom code can augment that data for the display purpose, right? And that's not to say that my custom code can save under the hood a very custom JSON object that happens to have a sub-property, which is the rich text protocol. So that is one way to do it. And but again, this is why I'm saying this is kind of advanced and intermediate to advanced stuff, is because you need to be able to really abstract these ideas away and build a very completely custom solution for this thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that strikes me, and I'm just catching the tail end of your discovery here, is the complexity that it's kind of like you don't really know what's possible or not possible or hard or easy until sometimes this is true with a lot of technology. It might look simple on the surface. It's easy for me to mock up an image with a text field, right? Hey, that's what designer like. Oh, well, look, it's easy. But guess what? The details are more challenging. So what are some messages, and this is kind of a thing for us at Contentful, within Contentful, but like, what areas do we need to improve to make that journey faster for others or easier? How can we communicate to our documentation and product teams what's possible or what kinds of things need improving here?
Well, so it was funny. It turned out that this was actually in the documentation, and David and I just hadn't read it.
I think we missed it too, honestly. We were skimming furiously, thinking it was going to be easier than it was.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it's still the educational aspect is very important, right?
The kinesthetic learning, the poking it and seeing what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think part of this session here today is to talk about not only what you did on your side, which is brainstorming and conceptualizing things that are going to be very important for the editors, but also on the other side of the fence to see that developers. I mean, come on, let's not be surprised that our jobs are not going to be easy all the time, right? We're going to find things that are a little bit more complicated. And not to mention, I think that's actually part of the reward, that's the rewarding part of the job, which is what you have here, the concept design you have here, we realize is actually not possible. It's just more work than we originally thought it was going to be. What we thought was we'll be able to attach on to a custom node type, or maybe just add a quick amount of metadata to the response itself, the data itself. That turns out that that's not the case. But that doesn't deter us from actually building this thing the way we want. If product was adamant about saying, like, we absolutely want this exact user interface, it's not impossible. We already know we can do it. What it would take was not only putting the rich text into a much larger object that contains the metadata, but understanding that you would need to now compose the rich text editor, which we do provide for free, but then also a custom component that understands how to actually save the data to Contentful.
I think I'm disagreeing that it needs to even be wrapped. Like, we have a key, like we have an ID that we know is gonna, that we know is going to be constant here, right? Like, we could have in the second JSON object like a embedded asset entry kind of thing that has a key, and then that key also gives us that meta text and kind of cross-reference it that way. And have them be two separate fields. The rich text field is still valid rich text that follows the rules, and then the second object is just an object with our ID and any metadata that needs to live with the ID. And when the front end consumes it, it would when it does, we would add something into the renderer when it gets to an embedded asset, or if we add an asset type or something, where it like just double checks and sees, does this ID exist in my metadata array? If it does, pull in the extra metadata. If it doesn't, skip it. The one downside there is that when we change the ID or we add a new asset, you're going to have to reset or reattach that metadata. But I think we could do something like that fairly quickly.
That's a reasonable trade-off. Like, it will always, if I'm following what I hear you saying from a user experience point of view or a state machine point of view, the image will like the text part of this is always dependent on the image. You will always have, here's this asset with an ID. It's a knowable thing, and if you had to recreate that, like re-add that, I think that's a reasonable trade-off. It's like, oh, you've got a new one, or you're inserting it again, or something like that. Yeah, you got to type the classes again, but I think that's pretty reasonable.
Is that something you think we could do pretty easily, David, or like at least have that second data store set up and then bring Alex in to tie in the actual visual look of it and the feel of it in the app?
I think that I don't want to say yes, because I think there's some edge cases, right? I think there's a few edge cases to your approach, which is what happens when we actually want to use the same exact asset twice or three times in the field. Using the ID doesn't help with its specific context, which is what I want to try to ensure that we keep that functionality alive. Because let's say we have a paragraph, an asset, and then another paragraph in the same exact asset. I think that's a valid use case. But the two assets are different in the sense of their
one of them's
position.
like a full position background, and the other one's like a left embed float kind of thing.
Right. So I think again, this doesn't break anything. It doesn't change the fact that this makes this impossible. What it does is it just makes us think, based off of our use cases, how can we implement this in a way that actually ensures, I don't know, I guess the least amount of bugs, right? That's kind of what we try to do. And obviously that's not always a realistic goal to have no bugs. But I think we're on the right track here, which is we have a data structure which is rich text that we can't modify.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can augment it, and we can augment it by adding it to a much larger data set, which is this metadata set that allows us to provide context to the rich text data set. And the reason why I think we can do this still fairly easily, it's not going to take too much work, is because of this line 24 here, this on value changed.
Right.
And really what we need to do, right, is we need to have, if we think about this in abstract terms, what we need to do is augment rich text assets. And so what this function needs to do is it needs to, every time the rich text changes, it needs to evaluate the one-dimensional, two-dimensional, however many dimensions, however nested your data gets in there. It needs to evaluate that, see if there's any assets, and then correspond those assets to contextual styles, which it also needs to keep track of in, say, another piece of UI. Let's say we have like a form or something like this, or we have input text boxes, let's say, that correspond. We map an input text box, we map some kind of UI to each asset that shows up in our rich text. And when we actually augment the data, and when we hit publish, or when it autosaves or whatever, we then are given the ability to save the underlying JSON object, which is not technically the rich text protocol on the surface, but it contains the rich text protocol in one of its various properties.
My fear is just that we will accidentally, we'll lose the validation because it looks like the server is the thing that's validating that this is legit rich text or this is not legit rich text. And
so there's some traffic back and forth.
We would lose that safeguard and that check, which brings us kind of back into Markdown world. Unless David, you look like you have an idea.
I think see, this is the thing. It depends on the trade-offs you want to have. You're thinking at it from the angle like, I like the fact that Contentful is actually giving me these handlebars and telling me where to go, and
not so much me the handlebars as the editorial team the handlebars. So.
I think that's a good point, right? Because even now that we understand this custom node types and stuff like that, people using the rich text editor don't care about custom node types. What is a custom node type? I don't care about what that is. So these kind of, if I go back here, let me save changes. If I go back to the user interface, it's great that I actually do get some kind of human readable error if something does go wrong, because this will at least alert me to the fact that there's a problem, right? So sorry, let me back up all the way.
Hey, gents, I have to go to yet another meeting. Busy. I can't wait to follow up with you on this. You're unpacking even more worlds than I thought. And hey, before I go, recently, I don't know if you saw it, but I did one thing. You talked about the the application needing to kind of keep scanning this rich text. Rich text nodes can get large, right? They have a 200K character limit. I recently did a video that shows a torture test of our demo. How many components can I drag in there? And I didn't even try to pack it with the number. I just jammed a bunch of types in there. Didn't see a UI slowdown. So that's something I'm looking for here. If we're burdening, anyway, it's a performance thing I want to keep my eye on. If this approach is too chatty.
Public?
No, it's internal.
Okay. I was going to say, if it was public, we could share it with people in the comments. But.
Actually, I think you probably could share it. I haven't, but we probably could. It's more of a fun, we're taking our demo to the limit kind of thing. Anyway, I'm gonna leave on that, but it could be maybe we need to torture test another thing with some kind of custom node type. Can't wait to see how that goes. We'll set it on fire, guys. Thank you so much. I'm gonna step out. Can't wait to follow up.
See you later, Alan.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Us front-end developers, we usually are fairly concerned about performance. In this case, I don't think I'd be too concerned about this. I realize that the rich text editor, probably the data structure can get a little complicated and nested. But when it comes to performance, I guess it does depend on how you implement it. If you're using this framework, such as the React framework here, in such a way that causes unnecessary re-renders, for example, and things like that, it could become a little bit of expensive. But from the pure data manipulation side of things, I have no doubt that even, fairly mediocre machines that are running Chrome and running the JavaScript engine inside of Chrome will be able to handle a couple thousand lines inside of a JSON object, even in a recursive manner. So I'm not too concerned with that right now. And in fact, I think at this point in time, since I'm still really in the proof of concept phase, I'm not going to worry too much about performance implementation.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do that yet either.
But it's a good call out. Once you build the app, of course, you're faced with a whole new set of problems.
You can come back and do that.
Right. Maintenance, optimizations, bug fixes. That's all stuff for when the app is actually built and running and people actually have valid complaints. Right now, I think this is kind of the path that we'd start to go down. I don't think it's something we should really dive into today because it's probably like another, I don't know, it's going to be another hour or two worth of content. I would say. But to sum it up, to kind of give an example of where this is leading, we found that this is not like a simple, straightforward problem to solve. It's a complicated, but I think very rewarding problem in the sense that when you dive into these tools, you'll see that we do provide all of this kind of high-level tooling that helps you compose together the solution that you're looking to achieve. We know that it's not impossible to do what Alan is suggesting. We know it's actually quite possible. What we're realizing really is just the time constraint, right? We need to spend more time coding it out and creating custom connections here. And I think that's totally reasonable because what we're talking about is not implementing some kind of third-party integration, or we're not talking about implementing something that's mostly already done, right? Such as like a like a Dropbox app, for example, to display some images. Those things are actually really easy to implement, which is kind of funny because they're extremely powerful and they're very easy to implement. This smaller piece of functionality, I would use the word bespoke, right? This is something that your company specifically wants to do when they're using Contentful. And I think what we're showcasing here is the fact that it absolutely can be done. You just have to be willing to get your hands a little dirty, right? So that's what we're getting into here. And I think the solutions that we're suggesting make a lot of sense. To me, the easiest way to continue down this path is to have the separate concerns here. So we have the rich text editor by itself. So I would actually just set this back to the default rich text editor. And then we have the asset metadata JSON object as well. And I think this is a natural course of progression, right? This is how developers tend to think about the problems, which is let's separate the concerns for the time being. Let's implement the functionality we want. So the asset metadata will listen for the rich text, and then it will augment its own data. That way, when you call the Contentful API, you get the rich text data, and you also get this asset metadata object, which you can then, in your presentation layer, merge together in a way that causes, the asset to be styled in a certain way. And then, so that's separating the concerns, building the functionality for both, and having them composed together. So then when you get to that point, if you say like, hey, I don't want to have content types that always need a rich text editor and an asset metadata field. Like I have this use case in various content types, and I don't want to keep creating these asset metadata fields to achieve this functionality. That's when you step back, you have an advanced use case, and you say, I can technically combine the rich text and the asset metadata field into one single thing if I understand that it's all going to be represented in JSON, and I understand how to build my React components, my Vue components, my jQuery components in a way that shows that to the user and allows the user to manipulate the data. So I think that's what we're getting at here. There's obviously multiple progressions that this app could take in order to achieve the final result. And some of them are going to be a little bit cleaner than others, I would say.
Sounds like we need to set up a part 2 and maybe a part 3 as well. So maybe this could be a nice ongoing project for us in Q1 as we start to figure out what projects we want to work on stream.
I think so. I mean, like I said, the functionality of this app, the functionality that this app proposes, I think
it's great.
wildly useful.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to take some work to do. This is not this is obviously turning into not an overnight project.
Yeah, we're already at 2 hours, and we've mostly written code that we've deleted because we realized it doesn't do what we need yet. So
yeah. I mean, for me, what I take out of this is the learning experience and the understanding that these things are possible. It's just some of them are going to be a little harder to achieve than others, especially if you want like that super custom functionality.
Yeah. All right. I think it's probably time for us to wrap things up. Then we're at the 2 hour mark. Unless there's anything else you want to add, David?
No, I think, again, I like the fact that people were submitting. We've already got a bug submission, which is nice that we were able to show.
Shout out to Mark.
If people want to talk more about this specific concept, or if you've got like your own use cases going on and you're unsure about something, or you just want to run some ideas, I'm always available on the community Slack. I'd encourage people to post it in the public extensibility channel that we've got.
That way everyone can learn from it.
Yeah, I think because, not only have other people maybe been thinking about the problem and have their own ideas, it just helps other people understand what people are using Contentful for. And I think that unlocks a lot of potential for people that develop with Contentful every day in thinking about how they can solve these kinds of problems.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah. So the Contentful Slack is at contentful.com/Slack. And you can also get to that from the Contentful developer portal, which is contentful.com/developer. And that developer portal, as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, is kind of our go-to place for Contentful developers. It includes links to our documentation, links to our tutorials, our live streams, all our other stuff. Something exciting that we have up on the page right now is a link to our meetup. We're doing a meetup next week in both Europe and North America, which I'm really excited about. We had a lot of fun with the one that we did in November, and so I'm really excited that we're going to be doing this again in December. We have some really great talks that I'm looking forward to seeing as well, and we'll be tossing the links to that in the description. Shout out to everyone that made time to hang out with us today and to write comments, and I think that's Salma, Stefan, Mark, Tim, Ashley, and Awal Polea, whose name I am still not confident in my ability to pronounce, and Tim as well. So thank you everyone that's been hanging out and has been making comments. And we'll be back next week for our last live stream of the year. We're going to be having Tyler join me, and we're going to be talking about the Contentful GitHub action that I built and that Tyler has been submitting pull requests to. And so I'm looking forward to showing it off and anticipating that Tyler will be complaining and telling me that the things that I built need a lot of fixes. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And so if there are any questions we didn't get a chance to get to, please ping us in the Slack. And it's been a pleasure, and we'll see y'all next week for the last stream of the last live coding stream of 2020. Bye everyone.